Hey everybody, before we get started I have two apologies to make. The first is for sounding like crap. I have a head cold, um, but that's just, it is what it is. Also, I know that my fan can make some annoying noises over my microphone, but it is just too hot in here to record without it. Moving on, with that said, I wanted to do a change of pace from some of my normal videos. This channel has been dedicated to a lot of different entertainment media that I find interesting and wanted to share with everybody. But the name of the channel, Ad Noctem Media, it's a Latin phrase. It means roughly into the night. And it's kind of a hat tip to the diagnosis that got me wanting to start a second kind of lifestyle YouTube channel. And that is recently being diagnosed with type 1 narcolepsy. It's had a lot of profound impact on my life and my ability to do things. And as part of narcolepsy, I have a natural gravitation towards night. I have a delayed sleep phase, which we'll get into that. But I'm very much more awake during the night. And so that was kind of a nod to that and the things that I do when I'm awake at night that, I may not be able to do all of the things that I want to do in my life all the time, but when it comes to the music, entertainment, gaming, things like that, I have more opportunity to do them at night, and I'm usually more awake to do them. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to talk, a little bit about what that means, how it coordinates with the channel, and answer some questions that I get when I tell people that I have narcolepsy, because I do like to share about it because it's something that's still not widely known to everybody, and education is always a good thing. Before I get any further, I do want to stress I'm not a doctor, so obviously if I say anything that runs contrary to established medical advice, I don't expect what I say to take precedent over that. I am something of a chronic reader and researcher, and I like to stay educated, and I think you have to when dealing with something like narcolepsy that's poorly understood, but I don't take that to mean that I know better than any doctors, and I never intend to come across that way. I also don't see myself as a poster child or anything like that. I certainly think everybody has to be their own advocate, but my experience is not everybody's experience. And just because I have it doesn't mean that I can speak for everybody that does. So with that said, I wanted to get started with some common questions. That's my dog walking around in the background. Get started with some common questions that also form a pretty good introduction to narcolepsy as a whole. So first of all, what is narcolepsy? Some people have an idea what it means. Some people know what it means. Some people think they know, but they know a very stylized version of it that doesn't tend to be true. So essentially, narcolepsy is a sleep disorder wherein the primary defining feature of narcolepsy is that REM sleep intrudes very early into the sleep process, so your brain doesn't have properly structured, ordered sleep, and REM sleep tries to kind of force its way into your life even when you're awake. Now, there's a lot of different ways that narcolepsy can present itself, but there are some primary defining features specifically of narcolepsy. So one of those is excessive daytime sleepiness. And this is not being tired, not being slow after lunch. This is profound tiredness, if not all the time, then a significant portion of the time. And for the most part, it's not relieved by getting enough sleep. It's not relieved by taking naps. Or in some people with narcolepsy, naps do help it, but it's something that they have to constantly do, and they have to make naps part of their day to get the good hours out of the day. So essentially what's happening is when I sleep, I go into REM very quickly. Not as quickly as some people with narcolepsy. But I have, we'll get into the diagnostics and everything of it, but the version that I have, I don't struggle so much with falling immediately asleep like some people do, but when I go to sleep, I will go into REM sleep within 20 minutes of laying down, and that's abnormal, and I do that repeatedly, and that is the defining diagnostic characteristic of narcolepsy. Now, I have type 1 narcolepsy, which is narcolepsy with cataplexy. So, of course, the next question is, what is cataplexy? Cataplexy is it's a symptom wherein you experience loss of muscle control or muscle weakness in response to stimulus, typically emotional stimulus. So joy, fear, anger, anything like that. And there's a wide variety of cataplexy. Some people have it really bad where they can get, if they start to laugh, they might fall over because they simply lose control. It's sometimes referred to as the opposite of a seizure. So whereas a seizure causes your muscles to lock up and tense, cataplexy just causes them to go totally limp. So a lot of people don't realize that there are two types of narcolepsy. There's the types with cataplexy and without. So I have cataplexy, but it's very minor. My cataplexy actually acted up the worst when I was coming off of antidepressants for a sleep study, and I'll get into why that happened. But my cataplexy tends to come in the form of if I laugh too much, I start having muscle weakness. In fact, I had a laughing fit one time where I was listening to a comedy podcast and I was trying to turn the radio off because I couldn't stop laughing, and it was kind of a loop I was caught in where I was laughing so hysterically that just hearing the podcast would make me laugh more, and I was trying to shut it off, but I was having muscle weakness and I was trying to reach up and turn the radio off, but I couldn't really control my arm enough to find where the power button was. It took me 3 or 4 tries to actually get enough control to turn the power button and turn the radio off. That doesn't happen to me all that much. But it can be anything from your face going slightly slack when you're tired, to slurring your words, knees buckling, to people will go into full paralysis where they're awake but their body's not responding. And this is very much similar to sleep paralysis, which is something else that I'll talk about. So then people want to ask, how does it affect your life? Do you just fall asleep randomly? I don't tend to personally. Some people do struggle with that. A lot of people do actually. The biggest time that I struggle with going to sleep is in the mornings. And I know that sounds weird because most people aren't morning people, but I really am not. If I have to be awake before 9 or 10 in the morning, that is when I struggle the most with sleep attacks. And the difference with having narcolepsy versus normal tiredness is it doesn't matter for how long I have good sleep. I can spend weeks doing nothing but sleeping, and then the first time I have to get up early, even if I get 8 hours of sleep, I will struggle with uncontrollably starting to go back into sleep. Now, I do have limited control over mine. I tend to nod off, so I'll get a little bit of the head bobbing like this a little bit, and my eyes will get really heavy, and I'll have to fight with them a little bit. And this will happen even on 8 hours of sleep. It will happen on the stimulants that I take. It will happen after I've had coffee. It is just really, really hard for me to stay awake in the morning. And that's part of my delayed sleep phase also with the narcolepsy. So when I'm in my more natural phase, I don't just fall asleep randomly. The stimulants that I'm on, they mostly stop it from happening. But if I have to be awake in the morning, especially if I'm sitting in a classroom, if I'm driving, things like that, then that's when I'm at the most risk for uncontrollably falling asleep. Now, of course, there's other ways that it affects my life also. So one of the most profound is the excessive daytime sleepiness. So, you will hear people say that they're tired, and I won't say that they're not, but I am tired all of the time. And it does not matter. I can spend every day sleeping. I have another comorbid condition with narcolepsy known as hypersomnia. So in addition to having the narcolepsy, my average sleep time every day is about 12 hours. And that's not refreshing sleep time, which is also a symptom of the hypersomnia. So I will sleep 12 hours a day and be exhausted. I can get up, do a couple hours of activity, and then I'm ready to sit back down. Actually, I just got back from the grocery store, and I am exhausted. I could barely get back in to put the groceries away and then come and sit down in my chair and do this, and I'm actually feeling pretty tired right now. I am on a stimulant that I take, so it stops me from nodding off, but especially at the kind of low moderate dose that I take for normal daily maintenance, it doesn't alleviate the tired feeling. I can still feel it. It's kind of like a pressing behind my eyes, and I don't know if I would go to sleep if I tried right now, but I know that the stimulant will keep me awake, and as well, having something mentally to focus on has been shown to help with narcolepsy. Also, they've proven in a lab environment that creative mental exercises do help keep you awake. So I have a very, very hard time getting a normal 8-hour workday where I'm not exhausted. Depending on the activity that I'm doing, I can get anywhere from 2 to upwards of 10 hours of good productive energy every day. But that depends on a whole lot of factors, and it's really hard to be repeatable. And I'll spend a lot of time where I'll just sit and zone out. So the just sitting and staring is something that a lot of people with narcolepsy do experience, and it's just because of the exhaustion. But you get a lot of other symptoms that would be like somebody with a sleep-deprived brain would have. So a lot of people with narcolepsy, our brains operate constantly as though we're sleep-deprived. I've heard the numbers anywhere from 24 to 48 hours without sleep pretty much replicates what a person with narcolepsy has day in and day out. So think of all the things that are associated with that. And I do experience those. Anything from the short-term memory can be absolutely crappy sometimes. The stimulants do help with that. They help with a lot of them. So the short-term memory, computational power, having to read very thick mathematical or technical documents can be really, really difficult sometimes. Following a train of thought, having a conversation, even I can zone out kind of halfway through a conversation. Getting very disoriented. So there's a phrase called brain fog, and it truly does feel like your head is in a fog, in a cloud. You feel a little almost like floaty, drifty. I'm not really a drinker, so I couldn't tell you if it feels like being drunk or high, but I would have to imagine that in some way it does. I can be very slow to respond, where I'll hear something and it just kind of sits there in my brain and it doesn't process for a minute, so people can definitely tell when I'm having a conversation with them sometimes that is the case. So all of these symptoms, they are related to the narcolepsy and the hypersomnia, and they very much do make it difficult to work. In fact, I haven't been working full-time since I've been diagnosed because a lot of the implications of having the narcolepsy and all of the stuff that it brings with it. So people will ask a lot of times, how long have you been dealing with this, or how long have you been diagnosed? And that's a two-part question. I've been dealing with symptoms of the narcolepsy probably since I was 16, and I think they've probably been in full swing since I was about 19 to 21-ish is where I noticed them really kicking into full swing. And for reference, I'm 24 now. So I was misdiagnosed for many years, and most people with narcolepsy, they are. So you'll get diagnoses ranging from depression, chronic fatigue syndrome, general hypersomnia. Some people even, because of some of the other effects, will get diagnosed with things like schizophrenia and psychotic depression, when in actuality the hallucinations and odd behavior are explained by your brain trying to go into REM sleep, and getting things like nighttime hallucinations and things like that is very common, and it's not actually an indicator of any other mental disorder. It doesn't mean that you are delusional or anything like that. It's actually a well-known documented phenomenon of early REM activity while your brain's not fully asleep, causing hallucinations and things like that. Actually, I just had to stop that past take because I started to ramble and actually forgot what the segment was that I was doing. So today's a very, what I call a heavy fatigue day for me, so I'm definitely very discombobulated, some people would say. And with narcolepsy, you get automatic behaviors that sometimes take over. For some people, they can be writing something and they'll continue to write, but they'll start scribbling nonsense. For me, I've actually noticed one of my automatic behaviors is I will continue talking about a subject and I will rant about it, but there is no thought going on up here. I just kind of go, and that's what happened just there. Some people also get what they call like memory blanks or bobbles, where they'll just zone out for a second and then pick back up where what they were doing. I don't tend to get that quite as bad, but I definitely get the just talking and talking and talking because some part of my brain is just taking over and I'm not fully thinking about it in the front of my brain, which is very strange for me because I'm very much a calculated person in thinking about everything that I say before it leaves my mouth. So it's actually only within the past, I think, less than 6 weeks ago, I was diagnosed with type 1 narcolepsy, but I'd settled on being pretty sure I had it about 4 months ago based on the different symptoms I was having that were kind of unique and exclusive to narcolepsy. It just took all of that time for me to work my way through a sleep specialist and get diagnosed. So that actually leads me pretty well into my next question I get, which is, well, how do you get tested for something like narcolepsy? And there's actually, there's one method that's not very commonly used, and that's a spinal tap, because a spinal tap can actually detect the missing levels of the protein, either hypocretin or orexin, same protein with two names. The spinal tap can detect a low level of that in your cerebrospinal fluid, and that can diagnose type 1 narcolepsy, but that actually won't diagnose type 2 narcolepsy, and that's not very commonly used, at least in the US. I've heard that in certain European states they require a spinal tap for an affirmative diagnosis. I'm pretty glad I didn't have to get one. For me, the diagnosis was a sleep study. So the first night they do an overnight sleep test, and I slept, I think, something like 9 hours before they finally woke me up. And the overnight test looks for things like rapid limb movement. They want to make sure you don't have restless leg syndrome or periodic limb movement disorder. It checks for sleep apnea, which I had previously been diagnosed with, and I'd been on a CPAP for a while. But my apnea was so mild that it was barely a diagnosis to begin with. And when I did the overnight study versus the home sleep study I'd done, it actually didn't detect any enough apnea to be considered an obstructive sleep apnea disorder. So that's basically the exclusionary test. And then the next day, they wake you up and you do what's called a multiple sleep latency test. So that's where every 2 hours they have you do a nap. In my case, it was 20 minutes. And then if you fall asleep, they allow the nap to extend for 30 minutes so that they can gather data on whether you're going into REM sleep states. So they look for your sleep latency, which in my case was controlled for a sleep latency less than 10 minutes, which means from the time I laid down to going asleep was less than 10 minutes. And in my case, I barely made the cutoff at 9.8 minutes. And I'm fairly atypical in that. A lot of people with narcolepsy will have a sleep latency of anywhere from 5 minutes, 2 minutes, some people less than a minute they're asleep. And I'm thankful for that because it means that my sleep onset is fairly predictable and not so uncontrollable. What I did have was in the 5 naps that I took, I had REM periods in 3 of them. I'm pretty sure I had REM in 4 of them because I had a very vivid nightmare in my 4th one, which typically only happens in REM. But definitely on the EEG, I noted, or the doctor noted, 3 periods of heavy REM activity for me in my 5 naps. So for a diagnosis of narcolepsy, if you're presenting with cataplexy, which I was but wasn't observed by the doctor, then you typically only need 1 period of REM. If you're not presenting with cataplexy, then they look for 2 periods of REM, so I had 3. So that's a positive diagnosis of narcolepsy for me. So the next question people naturally have is, well, can they treat it? Can they cure it? Can you live a normal life? And the answer is yes, no, usually. meaning they can treat it, they can't cure it. Most people are able to live a somewhat normal life, or at least learn to adapt within their parameters and live a normal life inside of that. So for treatment, you have three different types of treatments usually. You have antidepressants, SNRI, is used to help stop cataplexy because they're effective at reducing incidences of cataplexy. And it also reduces, it suppresses REM, which is actually why you have to come off of it before doing an MSLT to get proper results. But it can stop some of the REM onset. It definitely helps with the sleep paralysis, hallucinations, nightmares, things like that. I had my absolute worst when I was having my withdrawal from Effexor. That was when I was having sleep paralysis every night. I was having audio and tactile hallucinations every night. Thankfully, my hallucinations aren't visual, but I was having those really bad. And I was having vivid nightmares. Now, some of that was the withdrawal has kind of a pendulum effect and pushes it the other way, so you get it really bad. But definitely those effects are way better when I'm on antidepressants. There's stimulants. So you have your typical stimulant class, which would be your amphetamine type class, Adderall, Ritalin, Vyvanse, anything like that. And then you have atypical stimulants called eugeroics, and these are modafinil, which is Provigil brand name, and armodafinil, which is Nuvigil, are the eugeroics, and that's what I've been on. I've never been on any Adderall or anything like that. I was very adamant because I actually started my stimulant therapy well before I was diagnosed under a diagnosis of shift work sleep disorder and suspected chronic fatigue that turned out to be the narcolepsy. But I was very adamant that I wanted to be on a modafinil type drug and not an amphetamine. That was a personal choice. They're very effective for me and for a lot of people, and they're a little different. That probably would deserve its whole video to get into. And then recently there's a number of there's stimulants, and then there are treatments for wakefulness for narcolepsy that are non-stimulants. The newest one, pitolisant, which is under Wakix, is a histamine receptor, or a histamine antagonist. And I don't pretend to know all of the methods of action and what that means, but it's not a direct stimulant. It's something that you take daily when waking up, and it's been shown to help with excessive sleepiness in people with narcolepsy. So you have your stimulant and wakefulness therapy, and then the last thing you have is called Xyrem. So Xyrem is the brand name for a drug known as sodium oxybate, or let me see if I get this right, gamma hydroxybutyrate, which is a hypnotic sedative that was used recreationally and was famously used as a date rape drug. Xyrem is kind of a controversial topic for people with narcolepsy. It's a very scary drug to go on, but for people for whom it works, it can be life-changing. I'm actually in the REMS program to start Xyrem. I haven't yet. So Xyrem is a Schedule 3 drug, which means it's tightly controlled. It's mail order. It comes from only one pharmacy in the U.S. It's part of a federal program. The REMS program has counselors that call and check in with you. You have to do regular counseling calls. They check for interactions with other drugs. They counsel you and make sure you're using it correctly. Xyrem is something that it has a black box label. It is potentially fatal and harmful. It is potentially habit forming if not used correctly. It can cause some very not good side effects. Anything from bizarre behavior, sleepwalking, nausea, bedwetting, all kinds of stuff. But when taken correctly for a certain amount of people, it provides great relief. And what it does, you take it twice a night, and it lasts about 4 hours each time. It puts your brain in a state of deep sleep and rest and allows you to get the structured, ordered rest that actually restores your brain function and helps you be awake. And for this reason, it helps stop cataplexy because it's stopping REM intrusion. it's stopping all of those other things because your brain is actually getting the restful sleep it needs that people with narcolepsy don't get. Um, and that's why, even though it can have a lot of bad side effects, it's not fun to take. It requires a very strict regimen. You can't be on alcohol with it at all. You have to be very careful about your diet. You have to be very careful about your sleep time. In spite of all of that, for some people it's still a lifesaver because it's allowing your brain to get that sleep that it's not getting otherwise. And it's for that reason that Xyrem is the only medicine that actually can be said to treat the causes of narcolepsy. The antidepressants can stop some of the other effects, like I said. The stimulants provide you with wakefulness to get you through a day and keep you from falling asleep, but they're really just covering up what's actually going on, and in some cases they can perpetuate the problem because the wakefulness you get from stimulants can lead you to even worse sleep hygiene and getting by on even worse sleep because the stimulants will power you through. So as of right now, the Xyrem is the only thing that actually treats narcolepsy. Now, it doesn't cure it, but it treats the root causes of it. What causes narcolepsy? So just giving a high-level response to that without pretending like I'm an expert. Narcolepsy, it's widely thought at this time, is an autoimmune disorder wherein something causes your brain, your immune system to actively attack neurons in your brain that create a protein called orexin or hypocretin. And this protein is related to regulating wakefulness. So it's what's responsible for telling your brain that you're awake. So when you sleep, you clear adenosine from your bloodstream that tells you that you're tired, but you also generate a protein that signals to your brain that you've done enough sleeping, you're awake now, and removes that kind of tired response. Now, it's my understanding that this protein also controls other things that people with narcolepsy experience symptoms of. So it controls body temperature. So one thing that I get with, it's mostly a symptom of hypersomnia more so than narcolepsy, but my hands and feet are chronically cold all of the time. And luckily I live in Florida because the more I've read about this, it's known to get worse in colder states. It can have effects very similar to Raynaud's syndrome. So my hands and feet will get pale, white, blue, purple. They'll be cold to the touch, and then when I warm them up, like hot water is one of the best ways to do that, they burn really bad, and it's a deep burn that feels like it's coming inside of the skin. And that's a symptom of the hypersomnia in particular, and it's thought to in some way be tied into the orexin, which regulates your temperature. I also my ears get pale, but they get the worst, the opposite. They turn bright red and get very hot, and actually kind of painful almost to the touch. Also, it's tied in somehow to appetite, and I don't know the full details of how that works, but I will say that my appetite can be very up and down, and especially on days where I sleep a lot. If I have a bad fatigue day or I oversleep, I will binge eat like crazy. I will just eat. I'll go out multiple times a day to buffet style restaurants. I can start my day at an IHOP or a Waffle House and eat an entire breakfast combo, and then 3 hours later I'm ready to go out for a buffet and destroy 3 or 4 plates there. I mean, I will binge eat like crazy. So it's my subjective experience that the two are heavily related, and there is scientific evidence that orexin and the lack of it is tied to not regulating appetite. But whether that's been tied concretely, I don't have enough information to know. I had a quick memory blank again. In my case, it's thought to be that narcolepsy is autoimmune. And from the reading that I've done, they believe that narcolepsy, it comes from having a genetic predisposition to developing an autoimmune condition. Now, I have lupus in my family on my mother's side going back many generations. It's very prominent in my family. Not only lupus, we have very high incidence of Crohn's and fibromyalgia, and I even have an aunt who has idiopathic hypersomnia, which is heavily related to narcolepsy, in particular type 2 narcolepsy. Now, in addition to having this genetic predisposition to having autoimmune conditions, they also believe that there are certain things you can be exposed to that increase the likelihood of developing narcolepsy. Now, again, research on this stuff is new. It's preliminary. I'm not going to pretend that I know for certain that all of these things are settled science, but I do know that I have heavy exposure to the things that, in combination with an autoimmune genetic precursor, are known to be associated with the development of narcolepsy. And I'm being very careful about how I say that because I don't want to make any claims of direct causation or settled science. What I do know is that I received the H1N1 vaccine in high school several years before my symptoms developed, and H1N1 vaccine in particular is very highly tied to development of narcolepsy, especially in the EU. I don't know that the ties are as strong research-wise in America, but I don't believe that either affirms nor denies it. Also, for some reason, recurrence of strep throat is known to have a tie to it, and I must have developed strep throat 24 times in the 3 years I was in high school. And I even got scarlet fever one time. So for some reason, a high recurrence of strep throat is just known to be one of those things that correlates with people developing narcolepsy. Secondhand exposure to smoke was not something I had in my primary household, but growing up I spent a lot of time with my grandparents who were heavy smokers, so that's another thing that I was exposed to that's known to have some correlation, again, to the development of narcolepsy. And whether any one of those things triggered it, nobody can say. I do personally believe that my genetic background, my predisposition to autoimmune, in combination with one or several of those factors, probably led to my development of it. But I'm not trying to tell anybody that that's where it comes from. I'm not anti-vaccine. I'm not anything like that. I've just done enough reading to say that I think in my particular case, I've had a lot of exposure to those things which are known to be correlated with people developing it. And now, this video is taking a lot more out of me than I thought it would. I'm probably going to wrap up here. There's a lot to talk about, actually. I'm surprised the more I get into it, the more I could just keep going and going. But I think this is the last thing that I'm going to tackle before leaving it for another video. And that is the question. People will say, well, hey, I'm tired a lot. Do you think I have narcolepsy? And I'm going to say probably not, with an asterisk. So about 1 in 2,000 people has narcolepsy, but it's considered something that's underdiagnosed at this point in time. So one of the defining features of narcolepsy is excessive daytime sleepiness, and the excessive part is important. Our society is chronically sleep deprived. Most of us do not get 8 hours of sleep, and to get 8 hours of sleep for most of us means about 9.5 hours in bed all the time. And frankly, most people just don't get that. Even people who think that they do, if you actually track your sleep, you're probably not getting that. So, you know, if you're working full-time and overtime and, you know, then staying up late, you're probably not getting 8 hours of sleep. So if you're burning yourself out, you're staying up too late. Now, some people genetically are short sleepers. They just are. They just need 6 hours or less. They're outliers, but they do exist. But if you're experiencing this type of fatigue all the time and you're not getting good, you know, 8 to 9 hours with good sleep hygiene, then that's something that you should look at before you jump to the conclusion that you have narcolepsy. Limiting diet issues. One of the things that I did was switch to a ketogenic diet, and while I haven't stayed on that, that eliminated a lot of my energy issues because I was addicted to sugar and carbohydrates, and I was having insulin dumps and crashes all the time, and that was worsening my issues. So that was one thing that I eliminated. Heavy drinking, heavy caffeine and nicotine use can lead to a cycle where you're getting burnt out and crashing. Now, I'm as guilty of that as anybody else. I got by for a long time on excessive caffeine. and some energy drinks. So all that stuff can be leading to burnout that's making you tired when you're not on it. So that's something that you should clear up before jumping to the conclusion that you have narcolepsy. But on the other hand, there are certain symptoms that would definitely say you should see a sleep specialist. If you fall asleep uncontrollably, even when you're getting good sleep, if you hallucinate, particularly coming out of sleep or falling asleep, if you have hallucinations, visions in your room, sounds that aren't there, things like that, that's an indicator potentially of narcolepsy. Sleep paralysis. If you suspect that you have cataplexy at all, that is a huge indicator of narcolepsy. So all of those other things, sleep paralysis and hallucinations, they can be caused by things that are not narcolepsy. Cataplexy is particular to narcolepsy type 1. So if you get overly excited and lose muscle control, if you can't stand up while you're laughing, if you uncontrollably fall asleep, even in micro doses, when your other sleep habits are accounted for and you're getting good sleep and you're still falling asleep uncontrollably, if you're exhausted all the time but you're having insomnia at night, that's an indicator of a lot of things, but it's one thing that narcolepsy also shares. In particular, if you're sleeping 10 plus hours regularly, this isn't like you go on spring break where you're not working and not going to school and you spend the whole time, because you could be catching up on a sleep debt. But if you are consistently sleeping beyond the 8-hour normal and you're waking up unrefreshed, particularly if you take naps and you wake up groggy from that, that can be an indicator not necessarily of narcolepsy but of hypersomnia. It could be idiopathic hypersomnia, meaning that it's not directly correlated to any other disorder and that is separate from narcolepsy. Or you can have hypersomnia with narcolepsy, which is a subset of narcolepsy that's emerging, that's being found that there are narcoleptics with long periods of sleep time. So in general, if you're experiencing sleep disruptions, yes, you should see a sleep specialist. They're probably going to want to check first for sleep apnea, for restless leg syndrome, periodic limb movement disorder, anything like that, and you're probably going to have to go through that and get that stuff out of the way before you can get a narcolepsy diagnosis. That stuff, especially sleep apnea, is much more common. But if you're experiencing severe narcolepsy symptoms, especially cataplexy and things like that, make sure that you're firm with your doctors and getting the treatment that you need, because if you go through all of the exclusionary steps, it will take you a long time. You will be a long time without relief. And a lot of that stuff is necessary because narcolepsy is a rare disorder. A lot of people's sleepiness is explained by other things. But if you are having heavy symptoms that are explained by narcolepsy, make sure you're very upfront about that and find a sleep specialist who listens to you and will go through the necessary testing and will help you develop a treatment plan in the meantime, because it can take a long time to get properly diagnosed, and there are things that the doctors can do for you to help you get relief and kind of lead a normal life while the diagnosis process is going on. So that's going to mark the end of this video right here. I hope that it does lend some understanding to narcolepsy, both for people who have it, people who think they might have it and they're trying to gather more information, because I was there for a long time, and a lot of people are. I think a lot of people who are researchers like me will suspect narcolepsy for a long time before they're diagnosed. And while it's important not to diagnose yourself based on what you find on the internet, it's also important that you're well educated and that you are your own advocate. This video also, I hope, lends some understanding for people who don't have narcolepsy and have no experience with it whatsoever. There's a very stereotypical Hollywood movie image of people who just fall asleep and fall over uncontrollably at random times. And while that is a feature of narcolepsy that some people struggle with, there are a lot of people who experience severe disruptions of normal daily life because of narcolepsy, and they don't show up like that. And a lot of people with narcolepsy, and especially with hypersomnia, which is something that people haven't heard of, they do get dismissed by friends, by family, by coworkers. It's one of those illnesses that it's very, very disruptive to your daily life, can be heavily debilitating and even disabling, and the recognition is not there for a lot of people. So I hope that this lends some understanding to people who aren't affected by narcolepsy in any way and are looking to find out more about it. So with that said, a lot of my other content, like I said, is entertainment, music, video gaming, movies, things like that. I don't expect you to follow all that if you're here for the narcolepsy content, and vice versa. If you're just here for my gameplay content and don't want to watch all this in-depth stuff, I don't expect that. But I will be crossing back and forth from time to time because, excuse me, this is a lifestyle channel for me. An opportunity for me to share what's going on with me, share information about what I'm going through, and also share the things that I just enjoy doing with the world. I have other YouTube and media accounts that are more professional, and this is a chance for me to just have a personal account and get out the things that I want to share. With that said, I know that all of the content's not going to be for everybody. So let me know if you learned anything from this video. I know it's very long-winded. I know I can talk and talk, but there's a lot to cover. If you have any questions, comments, feel free to leave them below. I'm always reading, always looking out for input. I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed this video as dry as the content and delivery was, because I do genuinely enjoy sharing more knowledge and information with you. If you enjoyed this video, I'd hope to see you back around on the channel. Maybe even consider subscribing, especially if you have interests in both sides of the channel. But with that said, thanks for sticking out this one with me, and hopefully I'll see you next time.